Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with a quick deck overview / guide for Asmo food decks in the modern format. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews or guides, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and letting us know maybe what deck you'd like to see us cover next. So Asmo food is a deck that has largely existed since the printing of Modern Horizons 2. People have been trying to get it to work around Asmo, whatever you want to call it. Basically, centered around the card Asmo, which you cannot cast for a normal mana cost. As long as you discarded a card, you may pay it for either a hybrid red or black to cast this spell. Then you can sacrifice 2 food tokens to have target creature deal 6 damage to itself. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search for Underworld Cookbook. This is kind of the other half of the synergy of the deck. This allows you to discard a card to create a food token, and then also has another ability: sacrifice the Underworld Cookbook, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Ideally, you want this going with Oval Chaser Daredevil, which has an ability that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Oval Chaser Daredevil from your graveyard to your hand. Ideally, you want these 3 cards to have access to, and then what you're trying to do is play Asmo, get an Underworld Cookbook, discard Oval Chase Daredevil, get some food tokens. Normally, that's a pretty reasonable mid-range plan as you go through a game. But this deck tries to take it a little bit one step further. Enter Academy Manufacturer. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. So for each iteration of discarding a card, you're suddenly getting one of each token. And then for some reason, these cards multiply on top of each other. So if you have Academy Manufacturer and Academy Manufacturer in play and you're getting this loop going, you get 9 tokens, 3 of each. So the reason this is important is this particular build of the deck aims to go off with the card Time Sieve. This is tap, sacrifice 5 artifacts, take an extra turn after this one. If you can set up this loop, effectively you get infinite turns. You can beat your opponent down with Asmos, you can beat your opponent down with Ledger Shredders, whatever else you might have laying around. Urza Saga that we'll talk about in a second, those tokens. But basically, you're just kind of this mid-range combo deck that's trying to set up this infinite loop to get your opponent dead, or take a couple of turns, which is potential to just kind of get so far ahead in the game. Also to that end, you're playing a card like Emery, because you're in a very artifact-heavy deck, and this allows you to recur various artifacts, missing pieces you might find. Ledger Shredder also fits nicely. It's a nice beat-down tool that you're conniving with, because you're casting so many cheap spells with this deck. And then you get to play things like Street Wraith to effectively make your deck a little bit smaller by cycling it. Beyond that, you are an Urza Saga deck, which means you get to play all the fun toys with that. 4 copies of Mishra's Bauble, because why not? It's a free artifact that also allows you to get a redraw. Gives you a little bit of information about either the top of your deck before you fetch away, or the top of your opponent's library. Ether Spellbomb as a way to balance problematic creatures, or to return one of your own creatures to your own hand, maybe protecting an Asmo from a removal spell or something. Shadow Spear when you find yourself in racing situations against aggressive decks and such. Also grants Trample, which is relevant if your opponent has a bunch of chump blockers for your large Urza's Construct tokens. Then Soul Guide Lantern as just having a little bit of incidental graveyard hate. Now obviously this deck is weak to a number of things. You're weak to graveyard hate, you're weak to any number of things that disrupt the combo, although overall you're not terribly weak to graveyard hate. It does keep the Oval Chaser Daredevil combo from going, but you do have a decent backup plan of Ledger Shredders and Urza's Construct tokens, so you have multiple angles of attack. Now, obviously this deck is weak to artifact-based removal, etc., so to that end you also try to protect your combo a little bit. Sideboard, Flusterstorm, fight through counterspells or to disrupt your opponent's combo. Fatal Push for any type of annoying creatures you might be facing, whether you're facing a burn deck with something like Eidolon, or you're facing something like Death Shadow or opposing Maragavans and such. Haywire Might is a new addition to the deck. Whenever it dies, you may gain 2 life. Then you can sacrifice it, exile it, exile target non-creature, artifact, or enchantment. Blowing up Blood Moons and such that can be problematic, or something like Leyline of Sanctity, perhaps. Although that's not really relevant for this deck, but Blood Moon being the main thing. Pithing Needle to shut down activated abilities of cards, including opposing anything from Urza Saga tokens, or Urza Sagas if you don't have them, to Planeswalkers, to any type of creatures that their deck might rely on. A lot of different things this can hit in the format, but it's always nice to have something to shut down opposing Planeswalkers. Another Soul Guide Lantern, primarily here for any type of graveyard shenanigans, good at slowing down decks like Murktide and Living End. So obviously this is kind of the combo build of the deck. There is another version that we'll talk about in a second. Some of these versions also in the past have played something like Goblin Engineer to facilitate putting a key piece in the graveyard, whether you're putting a cookbook in the graveyard, whether you're putting a time sieve in the graveyard to be able to recover it, or just being able to recover it with Emery as well. This deck had a lot of utility in what it was trying to do, but overall, this is very much an engine deck, very reliant upon Asmo to do what it's trying to do. And then, primarily, you're a 2-color deck with a small splash of green for Haywire Might with this particular build. The other version is something that has been more popularized by Aspiring Spike in recent weeks. So this is a list that has been iterated on some by various different people throughout time. I know I've seen Doomwake working on some of these lists, but I believe the iteration of this particular list is mostly attributed to Aspiring Spike. I'm sure there are other people that have worked on it, but this is more of a mid-range version of Asmo. Now, obviously, you have the same stuff with Asmo, Underworld Cookbook, and Overchaser Daredevil. That's just kind of the centerpiece of the deck. But, you also have things like Gilded Goose to make food tokens, accelerate you a bit, Run in 6 to recur your lands, Urza Sagas, Besagus, etc. Quite nice as just this mid-range pile. But the new additions to the deck are where the deck really shines. Serenith Steelseeker, basically every time an artifact enters the battlefield, you can look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you can put it in your hand. If it's not, you can choose to put it in your graveyard. With that addition, you're basically trying to get value off of this. So you're trying to put things like Scrapwork Mutt into the graveyard, which has an unearth of when it enters the battlefield and you discard and draw a card, filtering through your draws that way. You can put Overchaser Daredevils in the graveyard and then bring them back with an Underworld Cookbook. Or you can also put Feasting Troll King into the graveyard. This is a 7/6 for 6 mana, including quad green, so it would normally be difficult to cast, especially in a format like Modern. But whenever it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, create 3 food tokens, so it automatically has a way of bringing itself back. And then, when it's in the graveyard, sacrifice 3 food tokens, return Feasting Troll King from the graveyard to the battlefield. It's basically Hogak Light? Question mark? But obviously not as powerful as Hogak or Broken, but still having a 7/6 Trampler that recurs in your graveyard, quite nice, especially in a deck that's already trying to set up this combo. And then you have Finale of Devastation as additional ways to find Asmo, maybe a Gilded Goose or a Serenith Steelseeker, or in the really light game, I suppose, a Feasting Troll King. You're still an Urza Saga deck. Urza Saga still allows you to find Cookbook. It still allows you to find all these other different things. Haywire Might, we've already kind of talked about in the other build. Just instant way to blow up problematic artifacts or enchantments that aren't creatures. Mishra's Research Desk, newer one to the deck as well. Sacrifice it to exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one to play with an unearth ability. Pyrite Spellbomb, much like access to having Ether Spellbomb, this allows you to disrupt problematic creatures, things like Thalia or Ragavan, etc. Obviously smaller creatures, but still. And also can be a cantrip. Shadow Spear, we've already kind of talked about, very good with your big constructs as construct tokens. Then Springleaf Drum, give you a little bit of mana access if you are a little bit low on mana for casting your spells. Obviously, once again, this is also an Urza Saga deck, but this one is more of a mid-range pile that plays quite nicely into Urza Saga strengths with various bullets in various different situations. Not necessarily trying to set up a combo per se, but you are trying to control the board with Asmo, get your opponent with Feasting Troll King, Serenith Steelseeker, etc. Sideboard, a little bit different, obviously. You're mostly in the green and red colors. Another copy of Besaju to blow up your opponent's annoying things like Tron lands, Blood Moons, etc. Villa somewhere to help protect your creatures in combo, especially from counter spells, potentially discard spells. Soul Guide Lantern we've already kind of talked about, very good against slowing down graveyard-based decks, such as Izzet Murktide, Living End, Dredge, etc. Pithing Needle shut down annoying permanents of your opponents. Shuts down a number of things, obviously, as long as it's not mana abilities. Can name mainly primarily Planeswalkers, but there are other permanents out there this can help slow down. Trail of Crumbs, quite nice in these mid-range ground fests against like 4 or 5 color Omnath, etc., giving you a way to kind of grind through, get a bunch of cards, and since most of your deck is permanents, this is going to generally hit. Endurance, additional graveyard hate pieces, very good in value-oriented games against decks like Murktide and such, very good against Living End, etc. Living End, or Force of Vigor, here to blow up artifacts and enchantments, Hammer Time, other Urza Saga decks, Amulet Titan with Dryad and Amulet, etc. Orvar, this is kind of a newer tech for a lot of these decks. Most mid-range decks these days, at least if you have the value to put into it. Orvar is primarily here for the creativity matchup. Whenever they force you to discard with Archon, you pitch this, make a copy of their Archon, kill their Archon, untap, swing, kill another one of their creatures or planeswalkers, kind of take over the game from there. Obviously, not the best for the opponent, but it is a way to fight one of the top decks in the format. So overall, this deck comes in a couple of different varieties. You have the kind of combo mid-range version, and then you have this kind of green-red mid-range control, just basically mid-range deck. Both decks have their pluses and their minuses. One deck's a little bit more vulnerable to graveyard. Well, they both suffer a little bit from graveyard hate, but they're not like overly weak to it. Obviously, you still have the backup plan of hard casting your stuff, but you lose access to run-in 6, etc. So graveyard hate can attack it, artifact hate can attack it, but it is a deck that does require some amount of knowing what you're playing against. I know Doomwake has done a number of work on this deck. I know Aspiring Spike's done work at least on the Gruul version of the deck, and I'm sure there are other content creators and stuff out there that have done work on the deck. Those are the people you should probably check out if you want to see how to play these decks and a little bit more about proper sideboarding and such. But this is a deck overview, not a complete in-depth what the deck completely does, so just gives you some idea what you're doing, what you're playing against, the kind of pieces you need to pick apart, etc. And, the cards to bring in against it: graveyard hate, artifact hate. Get them dead if you can, but obviously that's a little bit difficult with food tokens, so a deck like Burn can sometimes struggle in these matchups if your opponent plays with it right. I've noticed that a lot of Asmo pilots don't seem to understand that you can just win by creating a food token in return against Burn. But beyond that, it's a deck you should be aware of, a deck that's been doing quite well, especially the Gruul version of the deck. Obviously, the Dimir or Grixis version of the deck is a little bit more common in the past, but both decks have seen play, and you should be aware of them. Once again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you like this kind of deck overviews, and hope to see you in a couple days for the next deck overview.